My name is Christian Garcia. I am the Associate Dean and Executive Director of the Toppel Career Center at the University of Miami. I'm proud to say I just celebrated my 19th year at the institution last week, which is pretty amazing. I never thought I would be any place for that long. But if you look at the background behind me, that is actually the University of Miami campus. I'm not there right now. I'm actually in my bedroom, but we miss those days. But I want to welcome all of you to our annual Toppel Day of Service Career Conversations. Um, First of all, I want to give you a little bit of background about the Toppel Career Center, who we are. We serve as the centralized career center for all University of Miami students, both undergraduate and graduate at the university, and we help students with setting them up for success for life after college. And that can mean anything from choosing a major, helping with resume, interviewing skills, connecting with other folks to find jobs and internships, all sorts of career related kinds of topics, as well as helping them with graduate school and professional school options. um, Toppel Day of Service is something we started about 5 years ago as a way to give back to our community here in Miami. I get to work with an amazing group of people on my team that really believe in giving back and know that it's important to give back to your community. And we've done a bunch of different service projects throughout the year. We've done beach cleanups, we've worked with small children, we've given back during Thanksgiving, to those who are less advantaged. And this year, our Toppel Day of Service was scheduled for today, and we were going to do something in the community, in a food bank. But then, of course, COVID happened. So we thought, let's not just cancel it. Let's switch gears, which we're so great at doing. We pivot, and we thought it would be so appropriate to give back to our community now in light of what's going on with COVID, and now how that has affected many people, not just in our community, but throughout the world, either temporarily losing their work or permanently losing their work. So we wanted to give back in the best way that we could, and that is by giving our expertise and our time when it comes to resumes, interview skills, connecting, and then providing some one-on-one career coaching. So before I turn it over, I just wanted to recognize some folks in general. I'm not going to go name by name, but Toppel Day of Service cannot happen without amazing volunteers. And those volunteers include employers that we work with that recruit our students for jobs and internships, as well as friends of Toppel. My best friend is on here. He works at Univision. And he has been part of Toppel Day of Service for many years. So folks who just really believe in the work that we do and giving back to the community. So wanted to recognize those folks, as well as our own students who work in our career center, and other students on campus who are going to be part of this program as well as some of our guest speakers today. So I wanted to recognize all those folks, and of course, my amazing staff at the Toppel Career Center for putting this together. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to Aurora, who's going to cue us up for the next session. Thank you all.
Thanks, Christian. Appreciate that. So I am so privileged to introduce our first panelist. We are joined this morning by Ms. Nanette Vega. She currently serves as the Executive Director of Programs for the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement at the University of Miami's Miller School of Medicine. Nanette was born and raised in Massachusetts. If she's a Patriots fan, I'll try not to hold that against her. Although even Tom Brady wound up down here in Florida. But she did graduate from the University of Massachusetts with a BA, but after earning both of her MA and her EDD from the U, she is a Cane for life. She began working at the U in 1999 and has worn many important hats here, including Assistant Director of Multicultural Affairs, Assistant Dean of Students, Director of the Center for Alcohol and Other Drugs. While she's been here at the U, she's earned many accolades from the U, including the university's highest honor, which is being inducted into the Iron Arrow Society. Additionally, she's won the Dr. Martin Luther King Humanitarian Award and the Laurel Award for Outstanding Work with Students. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate you volunteering your time and talents. So now let's talk resumes.
Thank you, Aurora, and buenos dias, good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I commend Toppel Career Center for hosting this event to support our community members who are unfortunately facing career challenges during this pandemic. I am reminded of how resilient we are, not only as individuals, but as a community. And with continued support and commitment with programs like these, we will overcome together, and I truly believe that. For the next 20 minutes or so, I will be providing you with a brief overview on resume writing. Your resume is basically a snapshot into your professional persona, and it's the first impression you will make with your potential employer. It's important that this document speak to all of the skills and talents you possess, which I know are many. Whether you represent the service industry, a trade industry, cruise industry, or higher ed, just to name a few, you have many remarkable skills. And I encourage you to start thinking about what those skills are and how you can broaden your resume and your search. And lastly, remember, there are no perfect or correct formats. It is really all dependent on the position you are looking for and hopefully secure, and your past experiences. I will share with you the major components of a resume and how to begin to gather all the information you need to create your resume. And ultimately, the goal is to secure an interview, right? And as an added bonus, you will be receiving a packet of more information from Toppel for your participation today. Lastly, I would like to review some Zoom features real quick. On the bottom of your screen, there's a chat function. I don't want to assume everybody knows, where you can ask questions. You can ask questions real time as I'm presenting, or ask questions at the end of the presentation, which I believe Aurora will be asking for the group. And we will address them in the manner and the fashion in which they are received. Any questions before I begin? All right. So what is the purpose of a resume? I mean, why do we even have resumes? Basically, it is a professional representation of your education, experience, and skills. It is your marketing document. It's how you are presenting yourself to a respective employer. And with the ultimate goal is to secure an interview. Next slide. Some of the required components of a resume include contact information, education, experience, and skills. And I will review each one individually. First, we'll start with contact information. Next slide. So as you can see on the right, it's an example of how your contact information will be displayed on your resume, which is typically found on the top of your resume. And for this example, we're using our very own Sebastian the Ibis. You will have to make sure that you use your full name and a telephone number with an area code. Make sure it's your most current telephone number and an email address. I would highly encourage that you use your professional email address, not a work email address, typically something at Gmail, and make sure that it's current. It's something that you actively check. And then also, you can also include your LinkedIn profile. And if you don't have one, here's an opportunity to create one. And it's pretty simple to do so and connect that back to your resume. And a lot of employers are also doing searches on LinkedIn. So it's another opportunity to have your resume reviewed by potential employers. Do not include information that is personal. So for instance, do not include information like your date of birth, your age, citizenship, or marital status on your resume. And if necessary, include your current address. So as you notice on Sebastian's contact information, his address is not included. Maybe Sebastian is applying for a job out of state. So he's most likely, and we know he's a Miami resident, Coral Gables resident, and he most likely is applying for a job in California. So many people would not include their address when they're applying for out-of-state jobs, because sometimes employers would take that under consideration, because that would mean that they would also have to pay for relocation costs, right? So that would be a situation where you would not include your complete address. But if you are applying for a local job, so let's say Sebastian the Ibis, who lives in Coral Gables, is applying for a job in Coral Gables or Miami, then yes, include your complete address. Next slide, please. So this is what your education section should look like, and it should be in chronological order. The first line should include the degree obtained and completed. So here it's Bachelor's of Arts, International Studies in Spanish with the month, May, and the year. The second line is the university in which you completed the degree, along with the city and the state. So University of Miami, Coral Gables, Florida. And here, this Sebastian the Ibis completed a minor as well as part of his Bachelor's of Arts, which was Geography and Regional Studies. If you do not have a minor, then obviously you would not have to complete that portion of the education. The second degree listed is an associate's degree in arts. Again, following the same format, include the month, which here is December 2010. The school, Miami-Dade College in Miami, Florida, and here they included their GPA. Why would they include their GPA? Well, clearly a 3.8 on a 4.0 scale is a very competitive GPA, and it says a lot about them as a student. So I would include your GPA. And this Sebastian, it also included his high school. So he attended Miami Senior High School in Miami, Florida, with a degree completion of June 2018. If you have more relevant education, I wouldn't include your high school, or if you're a more seasoned professional, meaning you have more work experience, you would not include your high school completion. But here, clearly, this is someone who is new into the workforce, so they've included their education. Next slide, please. So now experience, what do you include in your experience? So oftentimes when I review resumes, students oftentimes do not include unpaid experiences, and you should, because that experience might be relevant for the job that you're applying for. So experience can be paid or unpaid. So for example, if you completed an internship, let's say in New York at a business organization, and you gain relevant experience for this job that you're currently applying for, then that's something that you would want to list. And you also have to list experiences in reverse chronological order, meaning from latest to earliest, meaning from most current to earliest. Formatting should be consistent. So make sure that the font is consistent, make sure that the size of the font is consistent. I always go with Times New Roman, seems to be a standard font. Making sure that your the border is consistent, so typically it's an inch or half an inch around the resume, so it's very centered. Also include the dates and locations of your experiences. So similar to the example in the slide prior, it included not only the dates of completion, but it also included where the experience was completed. Next, use accomplishment statements with bullet points. And we'll be providing an example on the slide that's coming up next, so you'll see what that looks like. But each each bullet point should include an action verb, and be sure to use the correct verb tense. So some examples of action verbs are advanced, organized, coordinated, develop, established, and let's go to the next slide so you can actually see what that looks like. So an accomplishment statement should answer two questions: what I did with the skills that I used equals the results that I achieved or I got. So here's an example: managed operational requirements such as staffing crews while also coordinating with contractors and technicians for monthly maintenance, repair requests, and vessel detailing. So it answers what I did, it answers the questions of the skills that I used, and the results that I achieved with this particular task. Next slide. So here's some examples of experiences. The first example are for the service industry. So many people that work in restaurants, for example. One example of an experience would be supervising closing duties of a minimum 10 employees as a shift leader, or promote menu items through strong communication and customer service skills. Or let's say you're in the marketing industry. An action verb, assisted with producing 3 large-scale fundraising events, which raised over $175,000 for underprivileged children. Another example, action verb, requested and collected over 100 donations from local businesses to be sold with totaled $76,000, more than $76,000. Next slide. So skills, in your skills section, you are to include any relevant technical or computer skills. So for example, here we listed Microsoft Excel, Adobe Photoshop. So make sure you really review the job description. They're going to be very specific on the skill sets that they are requiring. And only list the skill sets that you are proficient in. Don't embellish your resume, because some jobs also require a sample of your work. So you want to make sure you're being truthful in your resume. Also, list any languages that you may know, and the level of comprehension, meaning whether you're fluent in a language or you have conversational skills in a language. And it is assumed that English is your first language because it's the way that you will be presenting your resume, right? Your resume will be written in English. And I'll give you an example of a time when someone might have over-embellished their resume. So you never know who's going to be interviewing you. I was part of human resources, and well, I'm part of human resources is part of my function in all of my jobs. But in two positions ago, I was hiring an admission counselor who would be recruiting in Latin America. And so clearly, being fluent in Spanish would be a skill that would be attractive for the job, and it was actually one of the skills preferred. Well, this particular candidate on her resume listed that she was fluent in Spanish. So not only speaking, but writing skills as well, which made her one of the top candidates. And so she was brought to interview, and in transition from one interview to another, one of the interviewers started having a conversation with her in Spanish. Well, lo and behold, she was not bilingual, which clearly did not make her an ideal candidate and eliminated her from the process. And again, she could have eliminated that by just saying that she knew conversational Spanish. She was clearly not fluent. So again, do not over embellish your skills because you never know who is going to be on the other side of the interview. Lastly, list any certificates or special training that are relevant, particularly for the job. And again, I want to make sure that it's clear that you may have to create more than one resume depending on the types of jobs that you are applying to, right? And so in this job market, you might have been in the service industry, but you might now be applying to a customer service type job. So make sure that the wording is relevant for each of the jobs. Next slide, please. So here are some optional components. There's also other things that components that you can include in your resume to make it more competitive or more attractive. Honors. So let's say if you received, an Employee of the Month award, or you were, you received an award because you had the most sales of the month. Let's say if you're in real estate. So this is a place that you can list all of those honors. Also activities, relevant and significant courses. Let's say if you have a business degree, but you're applying for a data analytics type of job. Your degree might not be in data analytics, but maybe you completed 4 courses in data analytics. This is a place where you would want to list that because that's relevant coursework to that particular job. The next component is licensures and certification. And I want to spend some time talking about that because there's there's quite a difference between the two. So certifications and licenses are credentials that demonstrate a level of skill or knowledge needed to perform a job, right? And so certifications are typically issued by non-governmental bodies. So for example, project management certifications, human resources is a common one through SHRM, the Society of Human Resources is a common one. But licenses are awarded by government or state agencies that convey legal authority to work in a specific occupation. So for example, nurses have licenses that they have to complete. HVAC, so if you work in AC industry, real estate, insurance, even barbers have certifications. So this is an area that you clearly have to not only list your license, but also where you obtained your license and what year, because most of these licensures have to be updated sometimes on a yearly basis, and you want to make sure that you're current. The last is volunteer and leadership experience. So here's an opportunity for you to tell them a little bit about yourself. What's important to you? What are you passionate about? That may or may not be in line with your current work skills. So for instance, in that component, I typically list things like, I volunteer with Big Brother and Big Sister. That's something that I'm really passionate about, have been involved with for a couple of years. And what does that say about me as a candidate? Maybe it says that, you know, I care about my community, I care about mentorship, and this is an opportunity to align your values with the organization's values, right? And so really think about, what are those things that are meaningful to you? What are those things that you volunteer for or have leadership experience? It might be for a non-for-profit. Maybe you sit on a board and you're the, you know, budget person or the co-chair. That's important to list in this section. Next slide. So some additional tips, you know, the first time you start writing your resume is not going to be the final draft. Your resume is going to have many drafts before it's in a format where it's presentable and it's submissible. So update your resume often, and I do this on a yearly basis. Make sure, you know, they're recommending every 6 months, but every 6 months to a year, because you just never know when an opportunity might present itself and you want to be ready for that, right? So what I typically do is I just keep a running list of everything that I do that year, and at the end of every year I update my resume based on the Word document that I've been keeping for that year, and it keeps my resume updated. Always check for spelling and grammatical errors. And yes, thankfully the computer has spell check, right? But sometimes some spelling and grammatical errors are not picked up by the computer. So this is why it's important to ask someone to proofread it. And back to my first point, expect several drafts. So don't overwhelm yourself by asking like 10 people to look at it, because again, everyone has different opinions on what a resume should look like, especially if they're coming from a different industry than yours. But have them focus on the spelling and the grammatical errors. And, you know, I always have at least 2 to 3 people look at my resume, in particular with word tenses, because sometimes I'm translating in my head. So I'm bilingual. My first language is Spanish. And sometimes I think of words in Spanish and I translate them to English, and it may not be in the context in which I want to convey in that sentence. So I always have someone who is a native English speaker always review my resume for those specific things. So I'm very specific in my ask when I ask someone to proofread. It's for spelling, grammatical, and punctuation. And then lastly, tailor your resume to fit a specific industry and position. I know many of us are representing a variety of industries, but the jobs that might be available now, particularly around this pandemic, may not be in the industry of our choice or within our typical skill set. So you have to make sure that you tailor your resume to fit that position. And again, don't over embellish. You want to align your current skill sets, because a lot of your skills are transferable, particularly around customer service and, sales and different things like that. So you have to utilize specific words, keywords from job descriptions. And here's a little unknown fact. A lot of organizations have, positions where hundreds of thousands of people apply for a position. And what tends to happen is your resume is picked up by a database based on the keywords for that job description. So you want to make sure that you become familiar with the job description, that you align your resume to the keywords within that job description, and that it becomes a match for that particular job. So going back to my initial point, you will have several drafts, but you will have several final resumes as well, tailored to the specific types of jobs that you are applying for. Next. Wow. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation. And, I just want to say that it's important that not only you take this time to update your resume, but make sure you utilize the resources available to you. And it is my understanding that Toppel has also volunteered their experts, content experts, to meet with you one-on-one. So this is a great opportunity to not only talk about your resume, but have someone look at what you are currently working on. So thank you for your time. And at this time, we will take your questions.
So actually, Nanette, one question did come into me through a private message in the chat box, and it did have to do with the keywords that you were talking about. So for example, like in the cruise industry, what would be some keywords that they can use in their resume so that the computer or the database is going to pick it up? What would you suggest? And also, we can open this up to Christian and Allie as well. If you have any thoughts?
So one keyword that comes to mind, particularly around the cruise industry, they're very service oriented, right? And so customer service comes to mind. I mean, I have been on several cruises and always impressed with the level of service that I get from everyone on board and all the employees. So that's something that you definitely want to highlight, because those customer service skills are transferable to many industries. And for instance, I know like Amazon right now is looking for, employees. That service industry type of skill, that customer service skill can be transferred to that industry. So it's not, again, the cruise industry, but that skill is transferable to the customers that they serve because they pride themselves on customer service. So right. Customer service came to mind in particular to the cruise industry.
I would think also anything related to problem solving. Because when you are in any service industry, whether it's the cruise lines, airlines, working in a restaurant, a lot of what you're doing is not scripted. You're being thrown things at you that you would never have anticipated. So being able to problem solve, to be adaptable, to be able to pivot at the last minute, I think anybody who's a hiring manager, any supervisor wants folks who are able to solve problems without going to their boss constantly.
Yes.
Or being able to say, listen, I found this problem, but these are some of my solutions. So I think, anything that's solution related, problem solving related, I think could be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. And to add to that, working in teams. So working in the cruise industry, you're working with a variety of people from all over the country. So your ability to interact with diverse populations is also a skill set that's transferable. Also project management in the cruise industry, that's all you do all day long. That's another skill set that's transferable to many industries.
Okay, so we'll close out this resume section with one last question, and it's a yes or no. Photos on your resume, Nanette, yay or nay?
No.
Christian?
Absolutely not.
That was 2 words, but I'll let you go by. All right. Well, Nanette, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate all your help with that. And I know I got some great takeaways from that as well.
Thank you so much. And again, I wish everyone the best of luck and just continue to be persistent. There are many industries that are becoming available that maybe weren't available prior to the pandemic. And make sure, again, you develop a LinkedIn profile if you haven't already, because that's another opportunity for employers to secure employees.
All right. So I do just want to add that we will be making available for you all a resource packet, and it's going to have samples of resumes, and it's going to have articles, and there's going to be a lot of information in there for y'all to process to help you, continue your career conversations. So Nanette, thank you again so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Presenter is joining us from Reston, Virginia. And so now we're in the part of the webinar where you've updated your resume, you've got your action words on point, and the database has picked them up, and you've gotten a call for an interview. Now what? So with us to share a little bit about interviewing and interviewing skills, we are joined this morning by Mr. David Ong, who is the Senior Director of Talent Acquisition for Maximus Inc., a professional services firm based in Reston, Virginia. Their mission is helping government serve the people by providing program management and consulting services to government agencies focused on public health care and social services programs. In his current role, Dave oversees activities related to university relations, diversity and inclusion, veterans and disability recruitment. prior to joining Maximus in 2004, Dave has managed campus recruiting programs for Capital One, Citigroup Corp, and Investment Bank and Booz Allen Hamilton. David has also served in several leadership capacities for the National Association of Colleges and Employers, also known as NACE. He's completed terms on both the NACE Board of Directors and as Vice President. And in July 2020, he will assume the role of President-elect for NACE. David is a graduate of the University of Richmond. And also, I would like to add, he is also a Patricia Toppel Award winner for, here at the University of Miami, one of the highest honors we can bestow. So welcome, Dave. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I cannot wait to hear about your interview tips.
Wow, well, I'll try to do my best to live up to the introduction, so much appreciated. Can everybody hear me okay? Wonderful. Allie, can we move to the next slide here? Well, greetings to all, and thank you for allowing me some time to chat with you a little bit about some of the programs we offer here at Maximus, but more specifically, looking at an agenda here that we cooked up with the Toppel Career Services folks, really trying to give you all some ideas about what behavioral interviewing is all about. Those of you in the job search, if you're actively looking, we do know that there are certain methodologies that employers tend to fall back on more than others. And there's plenty of evidence out there that suggests that behavioral interviewing is probably far and away the most popular method of actually assessing candidate capabilities. So we're going to spend a little bit of time walking you through that science. We want to give you a couple general tips in terms of how to navigate those types of job interviews, and then give you a little bit of previews as to what to expect in terms of what's changed in the last couple of weeks or so in the COVID-19 era, because there are definitely some changes that talent acquisition and recruiting teams are making to accommodate for what's going on in the world right now. So, Allie, want to move to the next slide, please? Thank you. I'd love to get some ideas from the folks that are actually either on the panel or on the actual Zoom call to just kind of pick your brain a little bit. So when you think about the idea of going through a job interview, so as Aurora mentioned, you just got the call that you've got an interview set up for later on this week. I'd love to kind of hear what's going through your head. What are the first things that come into your mind when I say job interview? Think about it as word association. Are there any terms or any feelings that get dredged up when I say those words?
Anxiety.
Anxiety. People get nervous. They get very anxious about it. And quite frankly, folks, that's very natural. If you look at what makes us anxious, what makes us nervous, oftentimes it's unfamiliarity, something we don't do all the time. And let's face it, we don't go to job interviews all the time. It's not something we do hundreds and hundreds of times in our lives for most of us. So that's a very natural reaction. Anybody else? Maybe this feeling of unpreparedness sometimes. You know, people don't know how to really get ready for a job interview.
I'm not ready, yeah.
Sometimes they worry, do they have the right thing to wear sometimes? We'll address that a little bit.
Overwhelmed about needing to find a job, so that overwhelming feeling of like there's so much at stake.
Right. There's a lot of pressure on these types of things for a lot of people. People set themselves up sometimes for a big fall as a result of that. So, and we're going to address some of those feelings as well. I think that those are all very common. All righty. Sorry about that. I don't know how I got muted there. So, Allie, could we move to the next slide, please? Great. So I think one of those things that will help you prepare is getting an understanding as to what employers are looking for. All right. In the talent acquisition and recruiting industry, most recruiters can basically take any skill related to a job and bucket them into one of two different segments. The first segment being what we call personal skills. You might also sometimes hear these referred to as soft skills. I prefer the personal skills term a little bit better, just because there are implications when we say soft skills versus hard skills, say, for example. If you want to look at the definition of a soft skill, it is behavioral in nature, and that it's something that we're basically learning over a significant period of time and almost becomes part of our DNA. Because we've done it so long, it's a natural way for us to react when we get into certain situations. These are also skills that are generally shared by everybody. They're not typically unique to any one person. So some examples of that would be, say, for example, your reliability, your work ethic, how well you focus on getting results, say, for example, Again, skills that everybody has. What's different is that we have them to certain degrees based on our upbringing, based on our education, based on our experiences, based on our attitude and priorities. Okay? We're going to flip that with what we call technical skills. And I know in the presentation beforehand, we were referring to some of those technical skills. These are skills that are usually specific to a certain type of job or industry. They are skills that in theory, you can actually learn by practicing them, by doing them quite frequently. Training can fill in the gaps in certain things like technical skills. So that could be examples such as how you present materials, your digital technology skills, your customer service capabilities. Okay, again, things that you can learn via training. What you usually find in most behavioral interviews, and I'm not going to say all, but most behavioral interviews tend to focus a little bit more on personal skills than they do on technical skills, with the idea that there's a large number of employers out there that feel that if you have a really strong set of personal skills, if you're reliable all the time, if you have a great work ethic, you get great results, those skills are harder to learn. I think employers kind of bank on the fact that if you've got those personal skills, they can train you in the technical skills, or you can learn that over a relatively short period of time. Okay. Next slide, please, Allie. So I think what you're seeing in the last 20, 25 years or so is a big change in how employers actually go out there and interview job candidates. I graduated from college over 30 years ago. I remember the typical interview back then was somebody taking a look at my resume, circling a couple things, asking me, why did you attend the University of Richmond? Or why did you major in English? And it would be half an hour to 45 minutes of those types of questions. And I kept thinking, why in the world do you think I'd be qualified to do a job at your organization based on those kind of questions? Are you actually learning anything about my capabilities other than my ability to regurgitate my own resume? So what's happened over the last 30 years or so, thankfully, is that employers have gotten a lot more savvy in terms of how they assess these skills that we've outlined before. Behavioral interviews are the ones that we're going to talk about the most because, again, we feel they're the most common. You're seeing a lot of employers that are using testing, assessment testing specifically. So there are very few skills out there, whether it could be related to honesty, integrity, customer service, mathematical capabilities, critical thinking. There are tests that you can take out there that cover all these types of skills. And you are seeing a higher level reliance on those tests by employers in this day and age. Certain jobs sometimes have what we call role play exercises. Say, for example, if you're looking at a position in sales, you could actually be given a role play exercise where somebody might toss you their cell phone and say, you have 5 minutes to sell this back to me. They want you to kind of play the part of the actual salesperson or marketing person in that particular scenario. And there are multiple different types of role play exercises. Another form of a role play exercise is what we call a case interview. So usually very specific to management consulting. It's basically an interactive problem solving exercise where your interviewer gives you a certain amount of data, tells you a little bit of a story, typically about their business, and asks you to work through a working problem, trying to come up with a solution there on the spot. Okay, all very different types of interviews, sometimes looking at different batteries of skills, but again, something that you're seeing more and more frequently within the talent acquisition world. Next up, Allie. So we mentioned before the idea that behavioral interviewing is the most common, and largely because, frankly, the premise is so simple. It just makes so much sense. Can anybody on the call actually finish this sentence for me with 2 words? The best way to predict one's future behavior is what? 2 words, fill that in.
Past behavior.
Past behavior. Thank you, Christian. Very simple premise. If we can move to the next slide, Allie. The idea that the way we react in past situations is likely going to reflect how we're going to address that same situation if it comes up again in the workplace. That's what employers are banking on when they use behavioral interviewing. This idea that it's going to be looking at a very specific scenario. The best behavioral interview questions start out with a very specific language. So if you hear your interviewer ask a question where it sounds like it starts with, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of a time when, If you hear that language, you can actually use this presentation and think to your head, okay, I'm in a behavioral interview. This person is trained to conduct a behavioral interview. It's a little different from a scenario that starts out with, what would you do in this situation? How might you handle this situation? That's very hypothetical. Who do you want to hire as a hiring manager? Somebody that's actually been in the scenario and has practiced that skill, or somebody who hypothetically or theoretically might know how to handle it? Most hiring managers and most HR folks are going to bank on the person that's actually been there, done that. And that's what these interviews are really supposed to actually evaluate. Okay? So if you move on to the next slide, if you choose to forget everything that I've talked about here in the last 10, 12 minutes or so and just remember one thing, and if it's this slide, I can walk away happy. Okay? The idea that when you're actually going through a behavioral interview, you're probably sitting down with an interviewer that understands this acronym called the STAR model. What it's saying is that if you're actually asking a question, if I'm the interviewer, I'm asking a question, tell me about a time when you worked really hard to achieve a specific goal, say for example. It would be my job as the interviewer to make sure that I'm walking away from that answer understanding 4 specific elements of the answer that you as the candidate are providing me. Starting out with S for situation. It's my job to make sure that you're describing the actual setting or the scene in which your story is taking place. Now, remember we mentioned in the slide before that these examples need to be looking for very specific situations or specific times. So the first piece of advice I would give you as a candidate is to think of an actual time when that situation happened. It may have happened 2 weeks ago in this job, or it might have happened a year ago when I was in school. It might have been during this class, okay? You need to pick a specific time, and it's super important that you isolate that time first and foremost, because it'll get you in the right mindset. And if you think about the easiest way and most organized way to tell a story, most people would usually say chronologically is the best way to do it. So centering on that time, super important. Once you figure out when that situation actually occurred, start thinking about the other W questions. What are the typical W questions? Who, what, why, when, and where? So in that kind of scenario, who is involved? Who is part of this team? We mentioned before, when did it occur? Why did this team come together? What goal were they working toward? Those are all parts of the actual situation. Another way you could think about it is think about how kids are told bedtime stories. How does a bedtime story typically unfold? Right? It usually sounds something like, once upon a time, there lived a beautiful princess and she had 3 ugly stepsisters and she lived in outer Bavaria 200 years ago. Right? Same kind of detail if you think about it. Okay? That's called setting up that situation. At that point, if I'm the interviewer and I feel like I understand the story, I'm probably going to roll to the next part of the question, which is focusing on the task. Exactly what are you trying to accomplish in this particular story? What is your goal? Pretty short and sweet, right? From there, you're going to have to move to something that's probably going to take a little bit longer. And because really this is where the meat and potatoes of the interview question is going to lie. And that's the actions, the steps that you took to get from point A to point B to point C. This is where you're really demonstrating the skill, folks. So you need to spend some time here. Most people would say they should be able to answer a behavioral interview question about 2 to 4 minutes or so, somewhere in that ballpark. I would tell you probably half your time needs to be spent talking about the actions that you took. Okay? Every little detail counts. One of the things that I'd actually give you a piece of advice on is you typically don't want to pick an example that's too far back in time that you can't remember these details. That can be super important. You want there to be a certain degree of recency. But as we move to the last part, the results, you should also be careful that you're not picking something that's happened so recently that there's not an end result that goes along with it. That's another mistake that candidates often make in that interview process, is that they pick something that's actually a work in progress as opposed to picking something that has a clear end date where there's an actual deliverable that's gone out gone out the door at that point. So R stands for result. How does it all turn out in the end? And it's important, I think, to think about how you quantify those end results. Nanette was talking before about having the importance of having certifications or awards, say, for example, or accommodations on your resume. This is a great way to illustrate that result. It could be I sold 150% of my quota that day, or I got a pat on the back from my manager. I saved the company $100. Those are all ways that you can actually quantify that result. Okay. I mentioned before that, actually, can we go back to the previous slide for one quick second? There was one other tip I forgot to mention. The key thing to think about here, folks, is that you want this type of interviewer to feel somewhat conversational. The best behavioral interviews are the ones where you walk away and you think you felt more like you're exchanging information and exchanging conversation or engaging in conversation with the interviewer, as opposed to it be the interviewer asks you a question, you talk for 3 or 4 straight minutes, they ask you another question, you talk for 3 or 4 straight minutes. In theory, that's not ideal because you want there to be a certain level of engagement. It's also very clear that when your interviewer is asking a number of follow-up questions during the interview. So say, for example, I've asked you, tell me about a time when you put in a lot of extra time to complete a deliverable or a task. I should probably be asking a number of questions along the way, even while you're speaking. I might need to ask, well, how long did it take for you to complete the assignment? Or who were the members of your team that helped you get this over the finish line? I don't want you to think that that's a bad thing when they ask those kind of probing questions. It merely illustrates the fact that they're actually listening to you and realizing that they don't have all the information to make the right value judgment. Okay, so don't be thrown when it feels a little bit more conversational like that. Okay, now we can move to the next slide. I mentioned before, one of the things that we were talking about with the folks at Toppel is, you know, they know for years now, for 4 or 5 years now, you've seen industries moving more and more to video interviewing, particularly when we do on-campus interviewing or college interviewing, say, for example, which is one of the areas that my team manages for Maximus. But I think what you're seeing in light of what's happening with COVID-19, with the social distancing measures in place, I haven't talked to a single person that does the same kind of work that I do that says that they're going to be doing face-to-face interviews anytime too soon. So I think it's important for you all to understand that when you do get the call for that interview, be prepared to happen on a face-to-face type of interview. Okay, so it could happen on something like Zoom. That's very common these days. A lot of folks are using Skype to do that type of interview. So those generally tend to be a little bit easier, in my opinion, because it's still somewhat face-to-face, just using digital technology to make that happen. There are going to be times, I would suspect, particularly if you're looking at positions that might be more high volume. So if a company's going out there like Amazon and trying to hire 1,000 delivery workers in the Miami area, that could be an example. They might have to interview tens of thousands of people to actually make that determination. So they might want to use, and I'm just being hypothetical here, they might want to use one of the video interviewing tools that actually allows them to program, to send you a link as a candidate that actually has pre-programmed questions, so you're actually just talking into a video screen. There's not necessarily going to be somebody on the other end that you're speaking to. In that type of interview, typically what will happen is that they will pre-program a select group of questions, maybe 8 or 10 questions. They're going to send you a link, and then you're actually going to tape your responses using your actual laptop or phone or whatever device you're using for it. In most instances, they give you 2 different opportunities to record your best answer, right? So they could basically say, tell me about a time we had to work hard to achieve a certain goal. Here's your first take, and maybe I mess it up. Maybe I bumble my words quite a bit, but don't freak out because they're going to give you another chance to do that in most cases. They'll usually say, here's your 2 chances. You can record them, watch them back again, and then submit the one you're more comfortable with. Okay, so it's a little bit different from doing that face-to-face interview. When you're on a video interviewing tool, it's important to maintain eye contact because a lot of interviewers like to evaluate nonverbal communications, but since they're not going to be shaking your hand, They're going to be looking at other forms of nonverbal communication. And one of those primary ones you can see on a video screen is eye contact. Okay? Think about the visuals that you're actually giving off. What's the background you're using when you're actually doing a video interview of some type? How are you dressed? Is it well lit? Can they see you? I like to practice that a little bit, to be honest with you. When I've had interviews in the past that were done on interview, I like to basically send my screen to somebody to take a look at, or I'll take a snapshot of it and send it to somebody else to say, does this look appropriate?
Can I chime in here, Dave?
Of course, Christian.
So with the lighting, I think a common mistake that many people make is that they think that the lighting should be behind them, either an open window if it's during the day, or some kind of lighting source. And what that does is the complete opposite effect. It makes the person really, really dark on camera. So I always like to be, like, for instance, right now I am in front of a window that is open to allow natural light. But if there's no natural light, you to have some kind of lighting source in front of you, behind the camera, as opposed to behind your back. So that's just one tip to keep in mind.
Thank you, Christian. You should be my lighting coach, Christian. So
there's a fee for that.
Another thing I think is important is, if you're not familiar with these types of technologies, it's a smart idea to test it beforehand. You know, anybody can create a Zoom account these days, folks. So if that's the methodology that an interviewer is going to be using, create the Zoom account, send a link to somebody, schedule a quick 5-minute meeting to make sure everything is working correctly, because you don't want to have that happen in the last second. And then lastly, check your microphone, check your volume settings, and make sure you're unmuted. Okay. Think I got right to 20 minutes on the dot. Perfect. Questions, if any?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. So we did have some questions come into the Q&A box. And Dave, how would you answer this? And let me open this to the panel as well. I think I've done well in interviews, but then I never get any feedback. I'm still looking for work. How do you get honest feedback after the interview is over?
It's a tricky scenario, to be honest with you. And I understand that frustration, to be honest with you. What you're finding, particularly in the last 15, 20 years or so, as people have gotten more concerned with feeling like they're discriminated against, say, for example, there's a lot more litigation about candidates suing companies because they feel that an unfair decision was made. What's happened as a result of that, which I think is quite unfortunate, is that companies are actually a lot more cautious about providing feedback, because they don't want it to come back and bite them in the form of a lawsuit down the road. So I wish I could tell you, I think that there's a lot of companies that are going to give a lot of feedback in that way, but I'm going to tell you, it's not something you generally see a lot of. I know when I do campus interviews, say, for example, the only time I'm ever really going to share any of that kind of information is if a candidate really bombs and it's because of a reason that is so obvious and easily fixable. If it's something so disastrous, we will usually provide that information, but even then we're not going to provide it directly to the candidate. We typically provide it to the counselors at Toppel, who then will pass it along in some type of feedback session. So
I think I agree. I had responded to this question in the chat box. I think, listen, it doesn't hurt to ask. The worst that's going to happen is, they're going to say, no, we can't provide the information, or they're not going to respond to your request for feedback. But it certainly doesn't hurt to ask in the form of, I really would like to improve in the future as I continue my job search. Would you be willing to provide feedback? I think that a lot of companies will not do that. I think some folks will do it. I think it depends on person to person. But, unfortunately, we do live in this litigious society. So obviously that's a big issue for some folks. Right. And they may be bound by what their company requires. So you have to be understanding of that as well.
So another great question has come in from Ashley. Any tips for a panel of interviewers? She writes that she had an interview with 6 people at once recently, and she didn't think she did very well because she wasn't used to interviewing with that many people at once. Are you apprised in advance that that's going to be the interview situation, or no? Like, you could walk in, maybe just interviewing, thinking you're going to interview with one person, but then you're in front of like 6 people like she was.
Mm-hmm. I'm not a fan, to be honest with you. I've worked for companies that have done it before. That's not something we typically do at Maximus. But I think the thing to keep in mind is that it's really difficult for the interviewer. I think it just provides, the candidate, I think it puts that much more pressure. There's a lot more nervousness on it, which is one of the reasons I really hate it, to be honest with you. I think the thing that's really difficult for the candidate in particular is to find a way to maintain eye contact with 5 or 6 different people at once without being distracted. The times that I've seen a panel interview work is if, say, for example, if it's a 2-on-1, maybe if somebody is sitting behind you and recording information, and then the actual interviewer is in front of you, and so you're only having to look at one person. I do find those to be a little bit more workable, and I can sort of understand the value of it because it's hard for the interviewer to ask the question, to be actively listening and recording information at the same time. So I do see some companies that do that 2-on-1, and they do it, I think, fairly successfully, where again, somebody's just recording everything going on, writing everything down while the other person is actually doing the intake. In terms of general tips with that, I do think you should ask your recruiter at all times what the interview process is going to be, how many people are involved in it, who they are. But I'm not sure if there's any great tips I can give you for a panel interview. I don't know if anybody else on the panelist has any other information that's out there for it.
So Ashley, this is Christian. Personally, I actually kind of like panel interviews because I guess for me, the way I look at it when I'm being interviewed, I look at it more as a conversation, as if I was, having a conversation with colleagues at a meeting or with friends. I think that there's typically one person at a time asking a question. And I think you really focus on that person, answer their question, give them the main point on eye contact. But I think just as you would in a speech or in a small group discussion, you're still going to share your eye contact with everybody, but it's okay to focus on one person at a time. That's really, you almost have to compartmentalize it into, these smaller one-on-one conversations, knowing that there's obviously other people in the room. But I like to look at it as a conversation. Maybe that makes my fears or my anxiety kind of come down, because that's all you can do at that point is really just turn it into a conversation.
Right. And I think maybe one other point of view you could look at, I'm looking at the chat box as well, is that maybe you could think of it as actually presenting instead of actually interviewing, because I think the idea that you have an audience instead of just a one-on-one conversation might make it a little easier as well.
All right, and we're going to close out with one last question. One-word answer. Lissa wants to know, is it appropriate to ask how you did at the end of an interview? Yay or nay? What does the panel say?
I think it is appropriate to ask. Again, they may say no, but you never know. They may say yes, and it doesn't hurt to ask.
I think that you could also follow up. Is there any other information you'd like, at the end of the interview? Because a lot of times they're asking very structured questions. They're very scripted, and they might want to toss something else in that might help figure out what type of interest they have in you. It might give you kind of a clue as to what they're thinking at that point. I do think it's important at the end of that interview to make sure you ask for follow-up. So when am I going to hear? Who am I going to hear from? You could ask for a business card or an email address. And I would tell you that, folks, in a competitive market like this, the little things count. Think about the idea of sending a thank you note through an email within 24 hours of when you've actually conducted that interview. It's amazing to me how easy it is to send to send a thank you note now than it was 20 or 25 years ago, because you can use email as opposed to using snail mail. But I think fewer and fewer and fewer people these days actually think to send a thank you note. So, all right.
So actually, Ashley just came in with an interesting point here. She says her new favorite question at the end of an interview is there anything preventing you from hiring me that I can address at this time?
I'm trying to figure out how comfortable I'd be answering that as an interviewer, actually, to be honest with you. Because the thing to think about is that an interview, in theory, is not supposed to be about the interviewer making a decision at that point. We like to think, the folks that really do the best interviews think about the fact that there's 3 stages to conducting an interview. The preparation that goes into it, the data gathering that actually happens during the interview, and then the evaluation period, which happens after that. I would tell you, very rarely do I ever walk away from an interview thinking, okay, I'm definitely going to hire this person, or I'm definitely not going to hire this person. Particularly if you're interviewing, tens or hundreds of people against one position. I might not be the one making the decision is the other thing to remember. It could be an HR person that's actually conducting the interview, and they're going to be feeding this information to the hiring managers to let them make the decision. So it's kind of a tricky question. It also is something that some employers could think of as a risky question, because it might be asking the interviewer to expose a reason that they're thinking of as to why they might not hire you, and sometimes they don't get that right. So just my take on it, though. So.
All right, well, this was a really interesting and engaging portion of our presentation. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us a little bit more about behavioral interviews. I know I got a lot of great takeaways from that, so really appreciate you lending us your time and talents today on this.
You're welcome. Good luck to all.
Thank you. And next, I'm very excited to introduce our next presenter. We are going to learn all about making connections in this time of COVID. Because now we've got our resumes ready, we've got our keywords, but how do we make these connections that lead to this, you know, the opening of the door with the interview stage? So we are joined today by Mark Trowbridge, and he is coming to us from a short distance away over in Coral Gables. He is the president and CEO of the Coral Gables Chamber of Commerce, and he has been there for the past 14 years in that capacity. So he has his finger on the pulse of Coral Gables and Miami in general. He is the chief association executive responsible for the day-to-day success of the more than 1,600 member organization. He's working with volunteer leaders engaged in the Chamber's long-term business development strategies and community initiatives. Mark was Deputy Executive Director for Business Development for the Miami Parking Authority in the city of Miami, and he also served as the Director of Development and Training for Switchboard of Miami, Inc. Mark has held a variety of leadership positions in the community, including past president of the National Board for the University of Florida Alumni Association. You know that college upstate. He has also been program chair of Leadership Miami and School of the Arts Executive Board and the Children's Trust, where he was also the vice chair. Most recently, Mark served as co-chair for the Super Bowl and volunteer committee, leading the recognition and engagement team. Mark received his bachelor and his master of education degrees from UF in 1990 and 1992 respectively, and he has lived in beautiful Miami Springs, Florida for the past 15 years. With his faithful canine companion, Sir Winston Churchill, he's developed a deep and abiding love for the Miami community, and he is here to share his knowledge with us today about making these virtual connections. Welcome, Mark.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Aurora. What a lovely and kind introduction. And greetings to all of you who are joining us here today via Zoom. I am now very concerned about my lighting after hearing Christian's comments from a few moments ago. But somehow the sun always shines on our sweet Christian, as you see there. Almost a halo effect. I love it. I love it. Good to see all of you so healthy and here and present with us today. So I certainly appreciate hearing some of Dave's comments and presentation earlier, and I think those will help inform some of the things that I would love to discover and cover with each one of you. And so just a brief comment for those of you that are not familiar with what a Chamber of Commerce does. There are thousands of business-based organizations across the United States who work with businesses of all sizes to help them connect and make meaningful business opportunities happen. And in a moment in time like this, even more essential to advocating and communicating essential services that are open, working with our businesses that right now you might understand are suffering, many of which are shuttered and closed or are working remotely, and giving them the resources from the federal government, from the state, and even right here at home to keep them informed. And so a central part of what chambers do is really connecting people via networking platforms. And since we are not necessarily coming together in a traditional sense right now, I want to talk with you a little bit about this moment in time as well as into the very near future. And so thank you for the invitation. I know she doesn't like me to embarrass her, but Ali Rodriguez, who works very closely with Christian and the team at Toppel, and I have known each other since graduate school at the University of Florida. So thank you for sharing that, Aurora. So we'll go ahead and begin with the first slide. And so for those of you that are following along, this is really going to be our call to action during this program over the next 20 minutes or so. And really it is these 3 items. First, I want you to think about the last time you were in a situation to connect professionally. Now, for some of you, that may have been more than a month ago. Some of you, it may never have happened in a professional setting. And for yet others, you're still connecting each day because you're doing what you can to stay relevant and focused even in this coronavirus moment. Second question, how did you follow up with that new connection? So think about the first bullet in that situation, and then what was the follow-up? Was there follow-up? We'll talk a little bit more about that and methodologies for you. And then lastly, were you successful in making a true linkage? And that linkage may come in a lot of different varieties, and we will drill down on that as well as we go through the program. So that's our goal today. We're not together for a very long time, but I know the chat function is open, so don't be shy about putting questions in there. I know Aurora is going to help us moderate that. You can do that as we go along. We can take those at the end, or if you have something incredibly pressing, just put it in all caps, and I don't mind if Aurora interrupts me. So here we go. So next slide, please. So as we talk about that call to action and that first bullet, think about the last time you were in a situation to connect professionally. And like I said, some of you may have had that experience. Some of you may do that on a regular basis. Some of you might be like me, where you did that 5, 6, 7 times a week through networking receptions and activities and events. And now you've kind of gone cold turkey, where other than through maybe a Zoom function or other type of socially distant and acceptable platform, you are somewhat remote. So I want to remind you that being socially distant doesn't mean that you're being isolated. So when you have opportunities like today, and I want to applaud and commend more than 40 of you who have come together to participate today and build your professional portfolio. You're not taking a back seat during this time. You're sharpening the tools in your kit. And so I literally applaud you for that fine work. So again, being distant from one another doesn't mean that you are completely disconnected from one another. Secondly, a great opportunity right now to work on you professionally. What are your career aspirations? I imagine many of you on the Zoom today run the gamut. You might be working right now, but you're working remotely, or you've been furloughed or potentially and unfortunately laid off. Maybe you're in the job market or about to enter the job market. So I know that you might be one of those scenarios, or you're trying to find a way to work with your team who may be remote from you like we have. We're a staff of 10. But since the 20th of March, I have been the only person coming to the office each day, and our team is working remotely from home. And so leading in that environment, connecting in that environment can be a challenge for folks, no matter your experience. The third thing is, this is a great time to be current and active in your industry. And I know that may seem a bit cliche that you should spend time looking and reading, but this really is a great time to say, I'm going into this line of work. What is relevant right now? What will the new normal look like? What can I be doing today that will help me be prepared for that? And the better and deeper and more meaningful and robust those networks are, the greater opportunity you are to step right back into where you were. Remember that working in your business and on your business is like working out. If you're not doing it, you're not going to see the results. And I would encourage and definitely ask that you keep those things top of mind. So if it means reading up on what's going on, if you're in the world of business, maybe you're a dental office and you've had to close because it's not considered essential, only emergency. Maybe you're working in advertising and your clients have put the kibosh on any new projects. Those are opportunities for you to work on you. And the last thing is, each day have a goal that works on connectivity and development. And what I mean by that is pick up the phone, send an email, reach out. I try to do that several times a day. I make a list each morning. I'm a Post-it kind of guy. So I will literally make notes on a Post-it of folks that maybe I've seen an email from during the week or something on Instagram or one of our social media platforms and reach out. That happened for me yesterday with one of the leaders at one of our car dealerships. And I just wanted to reach out and see how they're doing. They're an essential service. How are they keeping their employees employed? How are they keeping them safe? And how are they seeing the community interact? And it's surprising to no one that people are finding ways to take care of things around their home, with their car, and doing that while they're maybe not as busy as they normally might be at work. So you better believe that things are happening. So those are 4 things that I would like you to think about. The biggest focus is you, YOU, and what are you doing for yourself professionally in this moment. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the follow-up. So you've done the work, you've made the connection, maybe you haven't physically seen or been involved with somebody in the last month, but that doesn't mean you can't check in. I'm a big fan of sending people notes, whether that's electronically, using a LinkedIn platform and sending a, hey, how are you? What can I do for you? Or send them an actual letter. People want to receive mail. They may quarantine it for 3 days, but that's okay. A letter is still something very traditional and very valued. So what are the follow-ups? We have traditional and non-traditional methods. The most traditional methods, as you might expect, are the written notes or phone call. And again, people are more available right now. So you'd be surprised who you can actually call and get on the phone. So don't be afraid or shy to do that. Or if you have somebody's email, send them a note and say, hey, could I have 5 minutes of your time just to check in? And, you know, not make it about being a pitch per se, but more of a what can I do and be available and of value to you. I heard Dave talking about in his presentation about the idea of interviewing. And obviously a lot of those things are happening remotely. But in many cases, that has been part of that process for years. A lot of times, first round interviews have been Skype interviews. So perfect opportunity just to get even better at that, knowing that that may be the final decision maker for you getting hired or invited to a final interview when we are able to socially gather once again. Now, you may say, what are the non-traditionals? Well, you're probably doing those. You're sending a quick email, you're using LinkedIn. I would tell you that even in this moment, still do that. It may be the entree to a greater opportunity. I'm telling you, folks are looking for content. We're doing programs almost every day of the week, either directly or indirectly. And that is creating for us sort of that virtual networking platform, because even in the screen that I can see, you can look at 5 or 6 individuals and you know 2 things. 1, they're engaged with you. 2, how are they doing? How do they look? Do they look like they're taking good care of themselves? You can show empathy if it seems like they're, you know, struggling in that environment. Extroverts like me, very hard time in this world. I draw energy from crowds. So when I'm with a group of people, it may have been the longest day or the longest week, but my energy is rejuvenated when I have a chance to sit down, talk, share a conversation, and be in that person's physical energy. Harder to do on a virtual platform. So use your gifts to put yourself in the best place possible. Now you may say to yourself, you know, what's the point during all of this? Well, the point is you want to still remain top of mind. You could be a candidate. You could be selling a very relevant product that right now is on furlough. Or third, you may be looking for that next opportunity because over the last 30 days, you've taken stock of your situation and say, you know what? When this is over, there may be other opportunities for me. And you know what? That's the perfect time to do that. We encouraged you, remember, in the first part of the program to be working on you too. So that could be something as simple as your professional development or working on you as a candidate. Then I would say is opportunities to reinforce interest. Some of you on this call, on this Zoom, may have been to Career Expo just a few weeks ago. What a perfect opportunity to go back and reconnect with folks. I know many of you do like I do, and you love to collect business cards, right? So we've got some good ones here. We've got retail, like at Merrick Park. We've got Major League, like Miami Marlins. We've got restaurants like you have right there on campus, like Sushi Maki. What a great time to check back in with people. And it doesn't have to be a 2 or a 3 paragraph email. It doesn't even have to have an attachment. It's just, hey, came across your business card today and thought I would check in, see how you're doing, that you're healthy and well, and reiterate my interest. And whatever that interest may be, that is the point. Top of mind is going to be incredibly important. And I do believe people will remember 2 things on the other side of this COVID-19 transformative relationship between us and business. And that is that folks who reached out genuinely and authentically will always be on their mind, because not everybody naturally does that, and not everybody takes the time to do that when we're chugging along Monday through Friday. And the last thing I would just remind you under the new connection is there is always such a thing as professional courtesy. So even now, when you feel socially distant, make a personal connection. We have members doing virtual coffees. I think they're hilarious. I've happened to participate in a few of those. And you know what? Each in your own space have your own coffee, and you spend that 15, 30 minutes together talking as if you were sitting across the table from each other. I know Allie won't mention this to you, but we have now had dinner a couple of times. We order from the same takeout. We may be there around the same time, but we're distant from one another. And then we get home to our respective homes, and then we have dinner together for the next 30 to 40 minutes. Now, you can do that over a lunch meeting. Be creative. This time of year, our chamber always flies to DC with 20 or 30 people to meet with members of Congress. Well, guess what? We're still doing that on Tuesday, but nobody's getting on a plane or staying in a hotel or walking the halls of Congress. The members are going to Zoom in to our meetings. We have about a 3.5-hour block where they'll come in and out for about 20-minute segments. And we have found a way now to also engage more people who may not want to have spent the money, time, and resources to go with us, but can do it right from where they're sitting at home or in their office or wherever they're doing their business. So professional courtesy, always important. Follow-up, always important, even now. Don't think just because we're not sitting at our desk that we're not the professionals we were 30 days ago. Next slide, please. So my last question for you is, did you really make a linkage? So the linkage is more than just picking up 10 business cards at a networking event. It's more than just, you know, shaking hands or bumping elbows or tapping heels. It's what did you do with those 5 or 6 business cards? And my answer is, the less you have doesn't mean that you're not going to make a meaningful connection or a true linkage. It gives you the impetus to do a meaningful, legitimate, true, and authentic follow-up. So opportunity is everything. I know it seems nutty that right now unemployment has gone from 2.9% to 4.3% in the last 2 weeks. Okay, let that number sink in. And those numbers will be revised in another 2 weeks. And I am sad to say that they will likely be well over 6% at that time. And I'm talking specifically about Florida. Florida was enjoying an unbelievably high full employment rate. Miami-Dade County, 1.8%. That means pretty much anybody who wants a job has a job. And those of you that are here that are looking to enter the job market for the first time, you are the commodity. So I don't want you to pivot away from that and thinking about all of the metrics that you're hearing in the news and talking about unemployment. I'm a big believer that when we phase in the reopening of Miami-Dade County, Florida, and the nation, that things will come back. It will take a little bit of time. We need to be patient, focused on our health, and making good decisions. But jobs will be there, and the job you're looking for. So opportunity is everything. I am an optimist, and I encourage you to be an optimist too. Focus on business deals. So if you're in business and you had a Rolodex of business cards that you never followed up after a chamber breakfast or at a networker, now is the time. Be in the moment. Be aware that folks aren't necessarily looking to buy your product, but if they hear about it and they remember you, then when the time comes to get right back to business, even if it's in a remote way, they're going to call you. I promise you. People do business with people they trust, they know, and they appreciate. I'm adding that to the equation. And your reach out, even if it's just a check-in, is appreciated. I can tell you that for me as a professional. I hear that each day from our members. Maybe you're in the job market. Maybe you were already beginning the job market. I am amazed at the number of announcements I have gotten over the last 2 weeks of people who are taking new roles. Many of those things probably started in December, January, February, and now concluded. But they're moving forward. So when the economy is ready to be open and business is ready to be open, those jobs will be claimed. And I think that's an incredible thing to think about when you're getting a little nervous or you're feeling a little fed up or frustrated, that those opportunities are going to be there. And again, if you're in a situation where you're not sure you're in the right spot, this may be the moment to pivot and look for that promotion. But connect, do your research, and find folks now. Like I said, they are available. Be a resource to others. If you're a person in my role, you're working with businesses, you're creating platforms for folks, you're creating opportunities. Don't step away from that role. Be even more engaged, be even more present. That's something I see we're doing, and I'm educating and coaching our staff to be, because folks are reaching out to anybody who will be there for them. A voice on the other end to listen is an unbelievable value right now. Maybe not fix something, but be a great listener, be empathic, be present. And the last opportunity is be that mentor. Many of you on this call are probably already mentors. Maybe you have been a mentee. Rely upon that person. All of us have those 2 or 3 people very close to us who we can talk to. I shared yesterday on a Zoom webinar that my day-to-day routine is obviously very different like everybody, but a lot of times my emotional state falls somewhere between being frustrated and being heartbroken, because we're seeing businesses that are already telling us they won't return. They've let their folks go. They're frustrated, and so you take their burden on over trying to get federal dollars or apply for unemployment or reach out for a loan. Frustrating times. And so again, being that great listener. But if you have a mentor, check in with them. If you are a mentor, invite other people into the fold. You have the capacity, and right now you have the time to be a great mentor. How about our last slide? So my question is how are you maximizing this moment in time? I hope that as you have sat here today and listened over the last 20 minutes or so, you've taken down some notes. But those notes aren't just for you. They're for people you work with, folks that you're mentoring, for you as a potential resource to other people. But use the time wisely. I know it's hard to get out of bed each day and know that your commute to work is going to be to the dining room. And if you're like me, you're going to pass the refrigerator at least a dozen times on your way there. But the reality is this is a time for you to take stock. So I'll tell you 2 things that I've been doing. One, I already shared with you. I'm making at least 2 to 3 phone calls a day or writing notes on my stationery that are very personal and available to people and connecting with people. I know some folks may not get that piece of mail until they come back to the office. That's okay. What an even better gift to open that up and know somebody was thinking about you, had you on their mind. And the second thing is I'm trying to work on my professional development. So I'm spending a lot of time on Zoom calls that aren't even necessarily chamber related. I did one yesterday on how to use texting as a better way to connect with your customers. Not suggesting that folks do that now. That isn't something chambers have done. We're big in the email space, social media. But what if somebody sent you a text and say, hey, we're about to get on a Zoom call and talk about legal implications in the age of COVID-19 and how it affects you and your business? Would you join? Things that allow you to virtually connect, but also do it in a sense of, I'm available right now. We're going to continue to do that. So I'm working on me. I encourage you to work on you. Maximize this moment. Looks like it'll last a couple more weeks, but that will make you even stronger, whether you're a candidate, a leader, a day-to-day professional working with your colleagues. You're going to really understand your value on the other side of this moment in time. And then our last slide. I think that was it. Oh yeah, gold digging. I had to, oh, Aurora, you've been so kind. You've been giving me some nice head nods.
No, thank you, Mark, so much. And I appreciate you being so vulnerable and open about, how you've been engaging in, in self-care, what you've been doing these past, gosh, it's almost 6 weeks now. Okay, Monica has come to us with a great question. Can you share some sample small talk that you can use when you reach the person via phone call? I get stuck after seeing how they're doing, but don't know what other things to talk about without seeming like, hey, I'm looking for a job. What can you do for me?
So great question. And what I tell you is there is no script for this moment. I do think that people are a little bit more vulnerable. So thank you for that kind recognition. And I do think opening with a question, how are you doing? How is your family? How are you coping? Is a great sort of, we call it the icebreaker, right? The entree. So think of it in terms of a meal. So now you've sat down or you've Zoomed in or you've sent an email back and forth, but let's say you're having a conversation like we are. Then I think I would pivot to asking them, how has your business changed in the last month? Folks love to talk. We love it. I love it. I don't think folks, even if they're a little bit introverted, that's a safe space. So ask them how their business has changed. You're not asking them how's it going, because not everybody's going to be forthcoming with that, but how has it changed? And then I would ask them, what are you looking forward to the most in the future in terms of getting folks together? Because a lot of people, even if they have that one coworker who drives them a little bit nuts, you do miss that human contact. It's strange to come every day for the last 23 days to an office that normally has, 10 to 12 people in it, and then hundreds of people in and out during a week, to just me. And about the only thing I can say that is a good thing is that I can set the air conditioning at the 69 degrees that I like versus the 75 degrees that the staff likes. So I'm finally in charge. But Monica, be yourself, be authentic, self-disclose to the same level that you're comfortable. I think at the end of the day, if you end with something to the effect of, let me know how I can be helpful to you. I'm here. I'm a resource too. It may not seem like that, but I admire you and what you've shared with me. I admire your company, and I'm here for you. I think that leaves it very open-ended. And if you were talking to me, I'd say, you know what? You have a resume, send it to me. And that's going to be, I think, let that person leave that door open for them. Let them walk through it with you.
I think we have time for 2 more quick questions. Mark, any recommendations on where to find new contacts at this time? How can Ashley get involved in these coffee conversations that you were talking about?
So not knowing exactly, where Ashley is in her professional career, I would tell you 2 things. So most of you are on a LinkedIn platform, professional platform like that. So I would spend some time updating your profile so that it looks as fresh and as of the moment as possible. You could do something a little bit fun with that, even with the photo. I think most of us, other than Christian, have really let our hair grow. So I'm, almost 5 weeks in, and I never let my hair grow this long, as you might imagine. So you could do a little fun with that. But I think, even folks that you don't have, a 1 degree of separation or 2 degree, use your middle connector. Ask them to make that introduction. And I think, again, people are available. I think they can be more present. And it's just a soft touch reach out. But I have been more likely to go back and look at, business cards that I've collected. If that's not something you've done before, then I would make sure that from my professional point of view, I'm looking at associations, I'm looking at organizations. Many of them are having free webinars, and I would join as many of those as possible and put your information in the chat and say, listen, I'm Mark Trowbridge. I'm this role. I'd love to chat with any of you who might be open for a follow-up. Again, the worst thing that can happen is that somebody doesn't respond. And guess what? Tomorrow's another day, and you're going to do it again.
All right, and last question. Is this a good time to prune that ridiculous and stale list of connections on LinkedIn? Or maybe rejuvenate that list?
Yeah, I think it's, first of all, we're all a little bit creatures of habit. And so the things that are our least favorite thing to do, which, requires you to sit and focus and hunker down, still, even in the age of coronavirus, get pushed to the extreme. And I'm no different than that. But if you're going to work on you, that's a great task. So it's not only pruning it, it's looking legitimately at those connections. LinkedIn has a great feature where you can promote other people. What a great way to get somebody's attention when you say, you know what, Christian's a great connector. Christian's a creative force. You put that out there, people immediately go, oh, well, who's this person connected? But more likely, Christian's going to be like, thank you for that. And then the door has swung open. We're not supposed to be touching door handles, doorknobs, and panic bars. So in a virtual way, help open the door by being curious and by being present yourself. And get in there with the shears and prune it down. You may have even come up with some new great action verbs in this time that you can add to your profile. Freshen up, no greater time.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mark, for such an insightful yet practical presentation. I know I took a lot of notes. And so that concludes our virtual presentations portion of Career Conversations, a Virtual Service Day. We want to thank our amazing and engaging presenters, Dr. Nanette Vega, David Ong, and Mark Trowbridge, for taking the time to present on resume tips, interview skills, and making connections. We will now be jumping into the next part of our virtual service day, which is one-to-one breakout rooms. What's a one-to-one breakout room, you ask? This is your opportunity to be paired one-to-one with either one of our 28 confirmed employers or one of our 27 Toppel staff or student volunteers. They'll virtually meet you for a more customized, personalized, extended version of a Q&A session. You can ask questions about your resume, job searches, or how to follow up with an employer if you submitted an application, and or any other career-related questions. Additionally, I want to let y'all know that after Toppel Day of Service is over, you will receive via email a resource packet provided by Toppel filled with templates and helpful websites. So, who's ready for some additional career conversations? Let me see some virtual thumbs up out there. You'll be joining us by connecting into a new Zoom meeting, and that Zoom meeting ID is 423-807-310. And we really hope that you'll be joining us for the second part of our programming. However, I would ask that you please be patient as we invite you into the virtual breakout rooms. It might take a couple of minutes or so. And I want to thank you all again so much for making us a part of your day today. Thank you.